What's up, everybody? It's your favorite non-transforming favorite nerd, and today we are looking at our best and worst figures of 2021 that are not Transformers. My channel is obviously dedicated to Transformers in terms of its content. However, I review non-Transformer stuff year-round on my Patreon at the $5 level. Most of what I get is not Transformers. So we're gonna get into that. But before we do, I always like to have some sort of like honorable mention. And maybe I'll have to do some sort of statues thing next year just because I've been getting a lot of statues as of late. But I need to give a shout out to Iron Studios. They are company of the year overall for me. They came like almost seemingly out of nowhere with this really slow burn, and then bam! They were everywhere with everything, creating products at a top-notch level, and they deserve some love. Every Iron Studios piece that I've bought this year, and I've bought a lot, has left me 100% satisfied. And I can't say that about any other company, perhaps ever. I love their sculpts. I love the size, so to speak. I love the paint. I love how easily a lot of them go together. It's a good bang for your buck. I just think awfully highly of them, and I wanted to make sure I had some platform to give them a little bit of credit. Now, let's get into our list. For those that remember, our list are comprised of top 5 most disappointing. Now, these don't mean that they're bad figures. It just means that they disappointed you. They could be great figures, but you expect perfect figures from this company. Therefore, a great figure could also be disappointing. Then we move into the most surprisingly good. These are just figures that caught you off guard by how good they were, either due to your first impressions, reputation of the company, whatever the case may be. And then our worst, and then our best, which are pretty easy to understand, I believe. So shout out to Iron Studios. I love what they do. If you're at all curious, you can hit me up and ask about specific pieces. I might have them because I bought so many this year. But at the very least, I can give you some guidance or any additional thoughts that I may have on it. All right, let's get started. So we'll start off with most disappointing figures of 2021. And we're gonna start with this SH Figuarts Suicide Squad Harley. And the reason why this figure is disappointing is because it's a very good figure from an engineering aspect. Works extremely well, sculpted well, painted well. But it doesn't come with any real accessories other than a couple swap out hands, where I had to in fact just have her hold her ponytail in order to make her do something interesting. My boy Facundo pointed something interesting out that I had forgotten about, which is DC's new take on firearms in regard to toys, which is obnoxious, ridiculous, and stupid. But it's a stand they've taken, and as a result, our figures are going to suffer for it. And that resembles much like a trigger finger hand to me. But they left her alone here with nothing to hold. And as a result, it's just not a very aesthetically engaging figure. Coming in at number 4, this isn't a bad figure. It's just boring and bland. And it's not SH Figuarts' fault. I wanted a Nick Fury, that you probably couldn't ask for a better one. It's just still boring. It's one of those figures that I was like, man, because of the character's importance to that first overarching story of Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's probably gonna feel real good to have him on my shelf. And I got him, and I didn't, because it's not very interesting. It's just a guy with an eye patch and a firearm. I should give his firearm to Harley. Once again, it's not that the figure's bad, it's that the representation of the figure doesn't really bring any heat to the display. Coming in at number 3 is Mafex Psylocke. There's just some weird things here, and Mafex has kind of been on a pretty strong roll this year for the most part. They've had a couple blunders along the way, one of which we'll get to here shortly. But they've also released a fair amount of really solid offerings. And then all of a sudden came this. There's paint mishaps on the bands. The belt doesn't cover the seam of the waist. It's pretty articulated and yet often doesn't have the same life to it. They didn't let you articulate the bands on her waist. Like, there's just a lot of like really simple, stupid mistakes I feel like were made here that take this character down a peg. It's like I said, it's still a good figure. It's just disappointing in regards to what they've been putting out this year. Coming in at number 2 is Jackson from Star Wars Black Series. Once again, it's not that it's a bad figure on a technical level, it's just a real boring choice. And there's a lot of Star Wars characters that really need that Black Series attention desperately. And to get this, which is mostly used up of other parts from other figures, with just a big green rabbit head, it just felt like a real kick in the nuts. And I'm sure there's some Jackson fan out there that's just been waiting his whole life for this moment, and God bless you. But for the rest of us, it was a waste of $22. And if you didn't buy it because you're smarter than me, it was a waste of a release slot. And our number 1 most disappointing figure of the year for me is this Firefly. And the only reason why is because I've loved every G.I. Joe Classified release up until this one. And this one is where I began seeing some shortcuts that they were taking to hide repetitive elements and save time and money. And I've seen it more and more ever since this figure. And once again, it's not that it's a bad figure. In fact, it's a pretty good figure nuts and bolts wise. It was just disappointing because it doesn't hold a candle to most of their other releases. In fact, none of their other releases up to this point, in my opinion. And there's our top 5 entries for most disappointing figure of the year. Not a terrible lot, just figures that didn't stand up to what the line had previously established, ended up not really coming through in a collection, threw the accessories out with the bathwater, or began to set a trend of a downward spiral. So there you have it. Let's move on to most surprisingly good figures. Moving on to the most surprisingly good category, and what this basically means is that I had low expectations, or my first impressions were poor, or I didn't think much of the reveals, and when I got it in hand, I had a complete turnaround. And my number 5 is on there for pretty much the same reason my number 1 is, and that is I wasn't sure if I wanted it. Initially, I did want IG-11 because I wanted IG-11, Cara Dune, and The Mandalorian. I wanted those 3. But after all the Cara Dune shenanigans, I came to the realization that that probably wasn't going to happen. So then I regretted getting any of them. But when this guy came in, he was good enough for me to kind of be okay with the idea of keeping just the 2, him and the Mandalorian, in hopes that one day a Cara will come, so to speak. And to be fair, I should have expected this because it's pretty much all plastic work, and Hot Toys nails plastic work. They nail a lot of stuff, so to speak, but they nail their plastic work in particular. My only real beef with this figure is that it uses the same stand from the Mandalorian, so he has these footprints in the sand when he has those like rectangle feet, but they're like actual shoe prints on the sand of the base. My number 4 figure on the list is the G.I. Joe Classified Viper. Now, the reason why this is so low on the list is because I kind of have high expectations of this line since I messed with the Snake Eyes figure. But this one kind of went above and beyond. For one, I wasn't crazy about the helmet sculpt when I saw it in pictures, but when I got it in hand, I completely bought into it. And the amount of accessories that it came with that allowed you to interchange and make them all distinct while army building and unique was just a pleasant surprise, and surprisingly sensical in the amount of variance that you could kind of make. So that's why he makes my number 4. My number 3 is the Todd McFarlane crowdfunded Spawn figure. Now, I know this figure is the subject of much controversy. Now, I didn't go in on this figure, so I didn't really have a dog in the fight, so that's a valid criticism of my praise. However, with as much awful criticisms as I heard about this figure, to get him in hand, I was pleasantly surprised. I think maybe had I not heard any of those criticisms and went in blind, I would have perhaps even had the same. But because I just thought it was going to be death in plastic form, I was pleasantly surprised that it pretty much worked for me. So he makes the list right there, number 3. My number 2 is the NECA Frankenstein. Now look, before you start rolling your eyes, this is a NECA figure through and through. It has all the problems that a NECA figure has all of the positives that a NECA figure has. So it met my expectations in terms of its build quality and paint chipping and all the kind of stuff that I expect from NECA, inconsistency in materials, all these sorts of things. However, what did take me by surprise was just how much I enjoy this figure. Like how much joy it brings me to see, how it reminds me of being a kid and being kind of obsessed with the Universal monsters like Frankenstein, Dracula, Werewolf, etc. Like, it just makes me feel good, in the words of Holly Berry from Monsters Ball. I figured it would check some sort of box for me, but I had no idea that it would be such a pleasant addition to my collection that every time I look at it, it kind of brings a smile to my face. There's something about this mold and this paint job that captures the character perhaps more than I would expect with NECA. It's really well done. And our number 1 choice for most surprisingly good this year goes to Captain Rex. If you're on the Patreon, then you saw my first impressions of this guy, and it was pretty much filled with regret. Although I have a fair amount of troopers, I'm not the biggest trooper fan. Like, that's not what does it for me with Star Wars. I like to have an army of them, don't get me wrong, but like I'm certainly getting exhausted by them now. That being said, Rex is a trooper with character, right? So he's a bit different. So I did go in on him, but when he arrived, I was like, man, I'm just getting trooper vibes from this, and it's just a lot of money to spend on a trooper. But the way this figure is put together, the soft goods work like elastic suit, and then the armor over top, it was just a really pleasant experience to deal with and have, so he had to go down as my probably most surprisingly good figure of the year because he's pretty fantastic, and my first impression was complete regret. So the biggest turnaround for sure. And there's my top 5 most surprisingly good non-Transformers figures of the year. Pretty eclectic bunch, to be honest. Let's move on to the worst figures of the year. Moving on to the worst figures of the year, and look, I'll be honest, I might be biased here because I was just so disappointed and so upset with these SH Monster Arts figures. Like, I've never participated in the line before, and I was just expecting more, having dealt with SH Figuarts in the past. Perhaps they belong on the disappointed list, but I just couldn't think of anything else that hurt the way this did and made me angry the way these did. So this is making my list, and it's really just because the articulation is awkward, the sculpt is awkward, a lot of it doesn't come through, the articulation is okay. I just expect more from SH Figuarts, and and I love these characters, so it was really kind of a, I don't know, in the fact they're so small, it just seems like a weird scale. There's just a lot that I think missed the mark here. I think that pretty much the only thing that worked was the wash and the paint applications, but for the most part, everything that they set their sights on kind of missed. Next is Mafex Magneto. Now, once again, this could come down to personal experience with the figure. I went to swap the head on this figure. Shout out to Eric B. He let me borrow it or hold it for a review. I went to swap the head off on this figure, and it ended up snapping the torso in half. This is a materials issue. And if you're charging $100 to now rising to like $100 to $120 a figure, you need to come better, so to speak. You need to do better. You need to do more. This shouldn't be acceptable in any way, shape, or form. And for that, it makes my list of number 4 because there's a lot of things that are great about it, but if it breaks while you're trying to utilize the gimmicks, then it's not worth anything. Number 3, I don't really want to beat a dead horse to death, but this one is even worse than the King Kong. The tail doesn't operate properly. There's so many breaks in the sculpt for the head and neck for that to work, and it doesn't even get you a ton of range anyway. It's just miss after miss after miss with this. This is the SH Monster Arts Godzilla from the King Kong vs. Godzilla film, and it's just, it's not functional, it's stiff, it's lifeless, it's beautifully sculpted, beautifully painted, and that's about the end of it. Number 2, Darkseid Ray. Just basic stuff here. No love whatsoever. The sculpt, basic. The cape, basic. The soft plastic goods, basic. The character design, basic. Now, that's not their fault necessarily, but why even waste your time with a figure that has 3 minutes of screen time? Probably because you overestimate the popularity of what that scene would do. But if you don't have the foresight to see that without the soul, the representation of the character is meaningless, then you're already 2 steps behind anyway. The only thing that's good about this figure is the box that it checks and the face sculpt and paint on the face specifically. And that's it. Otherwise, awful mess. And numero uno, Storm Collectibles Kung Lao figure. Where do I begin? The face sculpt is awful. The proportions are wonky. The hips are about as wide as the shoulders, which always irritates me. The hat was warped and molded to the packaging, which ended up making it look more like a sombrero than the kind of blade hat that we're used to. The joint tolerances are still iffy and goofy like a lot of Storm Collectible stuff has been as of late. There's just not a whole lot of growth with this company. And on top of that, there's a whole lot of errors that weren't there to begin with. And that's the sort of stuff that really makes me cautious and vigilant. This is the worst non-transforming figure I've bought all year. And there we are, the worst non-transforming figures of the year. And, an odd assortment, really. You wouldn't expect 2 SH Figuarts to make the list. You wouldn't expect Storm Collectibles to make the list. Now, Hasbro and Mafex is perhaps more predictable, but with the run that both of them have had in their respective lines, specifically the Black Series and specifically what Mafex has been doing with a lot of the Marvel superhero stuff, it is somewhat surprising that they're on this list as well, but it's also a testament to how good a lot of the releases have been this year. Moving on to best non-transforming figures of the year, or non-transformers figures of the year, I should say. We'll start off with number 5, which is the HasLab Sentinel. Yes, the knee is weak. Yes, it should have had stronger ratchets. Yes, all of those things should have been taken care of. I agree with all of those points. However, the sculpt, the accessories, the paint, the attention to detail, the life of the character, all of the presence, all of those things work to this figure's advantage, and it should have come in a lot higher, to be honest, but because of the knee issue, it's coming in at the number 5. And I'll be honest, mine has the weak knee. If you're on the Patreon and you've seen the review of it, mine has the weak knee. It's been standing up there with no problem ever since it went up there. No issues whatsoever in spite of that. I love the gimmicks. I love all the extra heads. I love the tentacles. I love the extra figures it came with. There's too much good here to not include it. Number 4, Jar Jar Binks from the Black Series. Yes, it's a deluxe figure, therefore it brought in some extra coin. I get it. Maybe that's bullcrap and all that. I get it. I'm totally with you. But that aside, price aside, this figure is tremendously sculpted. It's tremendously painted. It comes with the appropriate accessories. Life comes through in the character. It's a new sculpt. It's a new mold. It's everything that I want in a figure. This has beautiful paint, adequate articulation, unique sculpt, presence, and character. And it has all of those things plus more. Because it's Jar Jar, it kind of goes by the kind of forgotten wayside because of how people feel about the character and what have you, which is fine. But that aside, this is a character that was important to that story. It needed to be made. It hadn't been made, and we got one, and it's pretty damn good. Number 3, Mafex Hush Superman. The only real complaint I have about this figure is the shade of yellow for the belt and for the S, and that's it. Everything else, I have nitpicks, I would say. Everything else is right in the pocket where it should be. It has tons of character. The sculpt is gorgeous. The articulation is gorgeous. It stands out. It's a beautifully sculpted representation of this character from that book specifically, and it's built well, which is a credit to Mafex when they get it right. So cheers to them for this figure. Really, really, really well done. My number 2 choice is Dr. Zaius, or Zaius. I don't know how to say it, I'll be honest with you. From the Planet of the Apes, from Mezco 112. It has all the things that you would expect from Mezco. Beautiful sculpt, beautiful paint, tons of accessories, good articulation. The thing that makes this stand apart from that is that the soft goods aren't unsightly, and the accessory scroll just blew me away. It just took me by surprise and really shocked me as to what was capable, or what these companies were capable of doing with such small accessories, with such intricate detail. And that's why it's number 2. And my number 1 choice is not necessarily the most exciting choice, but it is my choice, and it's the Hush Mafex Catwoman. This figure is not like excessively painted, it's not excessively sculpted, it's pretty simple, but you know what it does? Everything right. Like, everything. The paint is where it's supposed to be. Yes, it's not a ton, but it's clean, sharp, and where it's supposed to be. The articulation, there is a ton, and it's everywhere. There's gimmicks with swap out heads, swap out hands, swap out belt piece that also becomes the whip. It's just a figure that's extremely simple, but does every single simple thing right. It doesn't need to be extravagant if it gets it all right. And this one gets it all right. This is my number 1 choice for the year. Surprisingly, and definitely, I'm sure of it, a Mafex figure coming in at number 1. And there's our list of the non-Transformers action figure entries for the year. And to be fair, I mean, once again, this is kind of a growing trend we've seen probably over the last 3 years. Even the bad ones aren't awful, you know what I mean? Like, they're varying degrees of bad, but it's not like just utter gutter trash. For the most part, everything here is pretty solid at some level or another. A lot of entries from Mafex this year, and on the positive end. I mean, 2, but it's Mafex, right? So that's still pretty good, right? So yeah, hope you enjoyed that. Wednesday will be best and worst Transformers of the year, both third party and official. So I'll see you then. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Until next time, take care.